All right, today we're going to talk about something we all use, something so common we don't even see it anymore. I'm talking about the humble spreadsheet. But its history is anything but humble. It's a revolutionary story that basically kickstarted the entire personal computer industry. So, let's get into it. So, let me ask you something. When I say the word spreadsheet, what's the first image that pops into your head? For pretty much everyone, it's probably that grid of endless cells, maybe some pie charts, and of course, the logo for Excel or Google Sheets. Yeah, your mind jumps straight to computers. It's almost impossible to imagine one without the other, isn't it? They feel like they were just born together. But here's the twist. What if I told you that the whole idea, the name itself, was around way, way before anyone even dreamed of a personal computer? The story doesn't start with a microchip. It starts with paper. That's right. Before a single line of code was ever written, this spreadsheet was a real physical thing. A giant paper tool that accountants used to try and tame huge, complicated sets of numbers. The original spreadsheet was, well, it was super literal. It was a massive sheet of paper that literally spread across 2 pages of a ledger book. This gave accountants a huge canvas to map everything out in a grid, rows and columns to keep all their finances straight. And this paper grid was so darn useful that as soon as computers became a thing, people immediately tried to make a digital version. We're talking way back. Hospitals were using paper versions in 1906. By 1969, we got the first real electronic one, called LANPAR, running on these enormous mainframe computers. And throughout the 70s, big players like IBM were building similar things for their corporate clients. But, and this is a huge but, these early programs were nothing like what we use today. I mean, they were built for giant machines, not for regular people. You couldn't just click around. They were totally non-interactive. You'd have to feed them a stack of punch cards and just wait for the results. And forget about changing one little cell. You had to change whole rows or columns at a time. They were clunky, rigid, and only used in these tiny corporate niches. They were not for you and me. So, for the spreadsheet to become the tool that everyone uses, it took one student, one really boring lecture, and one absolutely brilliant, world-changing idea. So picture it. It's the late 1970s. A student at Harvard Business School named Dan Bricklin is just sitting in class. Up at the front, his professor is drawing this huge grid on the blackboard, filling it with numbers, doing a whole financial analysis, a totally manual chalk and eraser spreadsheet. And then it happens. The professor spots a mistake he made in one of the first numbers. And you can just imagine the sigh. He has to grab the eraser and then manually, painstakingly, erase and recalculate every single other number that was connected to that first one. It was just this painful, slow, incredibly frustrating process. And right there, watching his professor get covered in chalk dust, Bricklin has this total light bulb moment. He thought, wait a minute, a computer could do all this. Change just one number, and the machine could recalculate everything else on the board instantly. He saw it in his head, a visible calculator. And this was the absolute game changer. See, back then, programmers thought in terms of code and variables. Stuff like var1 plus var2. Bricklin's brilliant idea was to forget all that. He tied the logic to what you could see on the screen. Instead of abstract variables, you'd just point to the cells, like A1 plus B2. Suddenly, anyone could use it. You didn't have to be a coder, you just had to know how to point. That idea, born from the frustration of a boring class, became a piece of software called VisiCalc. And VisiCalc wasn't just another program. It would become the very first killer app, a piece of software so good, so essential, that it would literally create the market for personal computers. And the origin story is pure startup legend. Bricklin partners with his buddy, a programmer named Bob Frankston, and they form a company, Software Arts. They had no money, so they couldn't buy a computer to work on. They had to borrow the only personal computer they could get their hands on, an Apple II. And through the freezing winter of 78 and 79, they coded the very first version of this visible calculator. When VisiCalc finally launched in October 1979, they sold it for just under $100. I mean, think about that. At a time when software could cost a fortune, this was a price that made this incredible new tool totally accessible. The impact was, well, it was insane right away. In its very first year, VisiCalc was installed on more than a quarter of all personal computers sold.
That kind of market share for a brand new idea on brand new hardware is just unheard of.
And this is what makes something a killer app. Before VisiCalc, the Apple II was a cool toy for hobbyists. After VisiCalc, serious business people were walking into computer stores and throwing down $2,000, which was a ton of money back then for an Apple II. Not because they wanted a computer, but because they needed to run this $100 piece of software. The software was selling the hardware. Even Steve Jobs knew how massive this was. He said later that VisiCalc was what drove the whole industry forward, and that it was absolutely critical to Apple's early success. His point was clear. Without VisiCalc on the Apple II, the whole story of personal computing might have gone a very different way.
But you know how it goes in tech? Being the first one of the party doesn't mean you'll be the last one standing. VisiCalc's own incredible success created the very battlefield that would lead to its downfall. It was the beginning of the Great Spreadsheet Wars.
And the first major challenger, it came from inside the house. A guy named Mitch Kapor, who actually worked for the company that distributed VisiCalc, saw the gold rush they had started. He realized just how big this market was going to be, so in 1982, he left and founded his own company, Lotus. And this is where things get really interesting. See, each spreadsheet giant had its own kingdom. VisiCalc was the killer app for the Apple II. But then Mitch Kapor's Lotus 123 came along, and it was the killer app for the new king of the business world, the IBM PC. It was more than a spreadsheet, it was an all-in-one package. And then, a bit later, Microsoft swooped in with Excel, which became the killer app for its own game-changing platform, Windows, with its amazing graphical interface. A new platform, a new king. And the takeover was brutally quick. In 1983, Lotus 123 launched, and it outsold VisiCalc in its very first year. Just 2 years after that, in 1985, a struggling VisiCalc was actually bought by its rival, Lotus. That's the same year Microsoft launched Excel. And by 1995, Lotus itself was bought by IBM, which pretty much sealed the deal for Excel's total market dominance. And that's really the legacy, isn't it? Every single time you open up Excel or Google Sheets, you are using a tool whose fundamental DNA, the grid, the A1 plus B2 logic, the instant recalculation, it all came directly from that one idea Dan Bricklin had in that Harvard classroom. The name on the box has changed, but the core genius of that idea is still with us every day. VisiCalc was the program that gave everyone a reason to finally buy a personal computer. It turned a hobbyist's gadget into a tool nobody in business could live without. So it kind of leaves us with one big question. As we look at new tech like AI and augmented reality, what's going to be their VisiCalc? What's that one killer app that will make the next big thing not just cool, but completely and utterly essential?